You're walking onto the gym floor, right? And you just immediately spot this phenomenon.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. The ego lifting.
Exactly. Somebody has grabbed a pair of dumbbells that are just clearly way too heavy for them, and they are essentially performing like a full body seizure just to get the weight moving.
Yeah, the knees are dipping. The lower back is hyperextending. It's brutal.
Right. And the weight is just flying up in this massive sweeping arc. We've all seen it. And I mean, if we're being completely honest, most of us have probably done it when fatigue sets in.
Oh, for sure. When you're tired, form is the first thing to go.
Yeah. But today, we're stripping that entire process down to the studs. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling straight from just a masterclass of a breakdown by Keith Hennion, Esquire.
Yeah, from his channel, Built Different. It's a great video.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is to cut through all the info overload out there. We want to figure out why Keith argues you really only need 2 hyper-specific exercises to completely maximize your bicep efficiency.
And limit injuries, which is huge.
Yeah, exactly. And more importantly, we want to look at how the actual biomechanics of these movements expose, well, basically everything we've been doing wrong.
It is a really fascinating teardown of conventional gym wisdom. Because, to understand this Built Different approach, we really have to look past the surface level critique.
You mean beyond just telling people they're using too much weight?
Right. We have to look at the physiological reality of what is actually happening inside the arm. Usually when someone hits a plateau with arm growth, the immediate scapegoat is always genetics.
Oh, sure. People look at a professional bodybuilder and say, well, they just have the DNA for a massive bicep peak, and I don't.
Yeah, and Keith doesn't dismiss that. I mean, genetics do dictate your muscle insertions. The literal anchor point where your bicep tendon attaches to your forearm bone, that's predetermined.
Right, like if it attaches higher up, you get more of a peak.
Exactly. And if it attaches lower, you get a fuller, longer-looking muscle. You just cannot alter your skeletal anatomy. But Keith argues that blaming insertions is really just a distraction.
A distraction from what, exactly?
From the primary reason people fail to grow the muscle, which actually has to do with a total failure of the central nervous system. It's failing to communicate with the target tissue.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's the absence of a genuine mind-muscle connection.
Okay, let's unpack this because mind-muscle connection gets thrown around on fitness blogs so much that it almost sounds like some kind of meditation concept.
Right, like you just need to think really hard about your bicep.
Exactly, like if I just focus my energy, it'll grow. So what is the actual biological mechanism Keith is talking about here? How does the brain failing to connect with the muscle halt physical growth?
Think of it in terms of motor unit recruitment. When you pick up a weight, your brain sends an electrical signal down your spinal cord to recruit motor units, which are essentially just bundles of muscle fibers.
Okay, following so far.
If you are just focusing on moving a heavy object from point A to point B, your brain is incredibly efficient. It will recruit whatever muscles it needs to get the job done.
So it's not picky, it just wants the weight up.
Exactly. It will
Okay.
signal your calves to bounce, your hips to thrust, your lower back to pull, your front deltoids to swing.
Wow, so the bicep becomes just like one small player in this massive whole body orchestration.
Yeah, you're spreading the workload across the entire body. The bicep is barely getting a fraction of the tension.
I mean, it makes me think of like trying to hammer in a thumbtack with a sledgehammer.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, you're using your whole body, you're swaying around, and you're completely missing the actual target. It's like a pendulum.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that physics analogy is dead on. Inertia robs the muscle of tension.
Because if you sway your hips to get a heavy dumbbell moving at the bottom, inertia just takes over.
Right. By the time the dumbbell is halfway up, it's essentially weightless because momentum is carrying it. The bicep is literally resting during the middle of the rep.
Resting while you're curling a 50-pound dumbbell, that's wild.
Yeah, you might be holding 50 pounds, but the local tension on the bicep fibers might only equate to 10 pounds of force. Momentum is carrying the rest of the load.
So you're risking injury for 10 pounds of actual work.
Exactly. And Keith's entire philosophy is built around eliminating that inertia. Especially as we get older, relying on momentum and heavy loads to force growth is just a fast track to joint deterioration.
I have to leave the ego at the door.
You really do. The goal has to shift from moving weight to applying tension. And to do that, you have to force a complete neurological isolation of the bicep before you do anything else.
Which I guess brings us to the practical application. If human nature and our central nervous system default to using momentum the second a weight feels heavy, how do we stop that?
Right. How do we fight our own biology?
Yeah. How do we build a physical environment that actually prevents us from cheating?
That is the perfect question. And it leads directly into the first of Keith's 2 required exercises, the drag curl.
The drag curl, okay.
But, and this is key, he is very specific about the environment required for this. You cannot just grab the free weights you have sitting in your garage.
Wait, if we all have dumbbells at home, why does Keith specifically warn against using dumbbells for drag curls? Shouldn't I be able to just mimic the motion?
You can try, sure, but free weights operate in 3-dimensional space. There is literally nothing stopping your body from subtly shifting forward or backward to create leverage.
So you'll still cheat without even realizing it.
Exactly. Keith emphasizes that to execute a drag curl properly and force that isolation, you have to be in what he calls a slotted position. You need a fixed vertical track.
You're talking about a Smith machine.
A Smith machine, a small barbell, or even specialized weighted rods. But yes, the Smith machine is perfect for this.
Which is interesting because the Smith machine gets a lot of hate in the fitness community.
Oh, tons of hate.
Right. People usually complain that it locks you into an unnatural, perfectly straight plane of motion, which isn't how the human body naturally moves.
And, for a compound movement like a squat, that criticism is entirely valid. But for this specific isolation protocol, that unnatural, locked-in vertical track is exactly the feature we want to exploit.
Because it forces strictness.
Yes. When the bar can only move straight up and straight down, you physically cannot cheat. You cannot lean back and swing the bar in an arc. If you try, the bar literally just grinds against the rails and stops.
Okay, so walk me through the actual geometry of this drag curl for our listeners. If I step inside a Smith machine, how is this different from just doing a standard barbell curl?
It changes the entire lever arm of the movement.
Yeah.
First, you stand close to the bar, but you maintain a small parallel buffer of space between the bar and your torso.
Okay, so I'm not pressing my stomach right up against it.
Right. And as you initiate the lift, you do not let the bar travel away from your body. You keep it pressed back towards you. And to accommodate that upward movement, your elbows have to travel backward.
So my elbows are sliding behind my rib cage?
Yes. You are literally dragging the weight up the invisible line of your torso.
Hence the name, drag curl.
Exactly. Now, think about the mechanics of that. In a standard curl, where your elbows are pinned to your sides and the weight arcs out in front of you, the lever arm is longest and hardest, when your forearm is at a 90-degree angle to the floor.
Right, in the middle of the rep.
But in a drag curl, because your elbows are moving backward, you are continuously changing the angle of the resistance. There is no resting point. The bicep is under excruciating, unbroken tension from the bottom of the movement all the way to the top.
I'm trying to picture the anatomy here. If my elbows are pulling backward, doesn't that start engaging the back muscles like a rowing motion?
It looks a bit like a row, yeah.
Yeah.
But because your hands are supinated palms facing up, and the load is concentrated entirely on flexing the elbow joint rather than retracting your shoulder blades, the back is essentially bypassed.
Oh, wow. So it's all on the arms.
The tension is hyper-focused on the bicep. In fact, Keith uses a very specific prop in his demonstration to prove this point. He brings out a small, specialized weighted rod.
Okay.
It weighs a mere 9 pounds.
Wait, really? 9 pounds? Most people wouldn't even use that to warm up.
Exactly. But he notes that when you are locked into this slotted position and you strictly pull the elbows back without allowing an ounce of momentum, that 9-pound rod feels shockingly heavy.
I can imagine.
The central nervous system is suddenly forced to route 100% of the electrical signaling to the bicep fibers because the hips, shoulders, and back have been completely taken offline.
So this isn't just about building the muscle then. It's like a neurological primer.
That's a great way to describe it.
You are paving the neural pathway between the brain and the bicep so that the body remembers how to fire that specific muscle group.
That is the exact protocol. Keith uses this as his mandatory warm-up. He advocates for doing at least 5 sets of these drag curls with very light weight.
5 sets just to warm up.
Yeah, you are engorging the muscle with blood, establishing the neurological connection, and pre-exhausting the tissue. Only after that connection is locked in do you move to the heavier work.
Okay, so the bicep is awake, the nervous system is primed. Now we step out of the Smith machine and move to the second exercise, which is the main muscle builder.
Right, without the risk of falling back into those bad momentum habits.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because Keith advocates for the hammer curl, but he completely re-engineers how you are supposed to hold the dumbbell.
The grip modification is the centerpiece of his entire philosophy for this movement.
Right, because normally if you tell someone to do a hammer curl, they grab the dumbbell handle right in the center, wrap their thumb around it, squeeze as hard as they can, and curl it up like they are driving a nail with a hammer.
Yeah, a standard neutral grip. It's supposed to target the brachialis, which is the muscle that runs underneath the bicep, and pushes it up to make the arm look thicker.
But Keith argues that a standard, tight grip actually sabotages that goal. He introduces this technique called cupping.
Cupping, yes.
Instead of grabbing the dumbbell like a normal person, he recommends letting the weight rest on the outside palm and even pointing the index finger out.
It looks very strange at first.
It really does. I mean, instead of white-knuckling a baseball bat, you're holding it almost like a waiter carrying a delicate tray of drinks. It feels completely counterintuitive.
It does feel counterintuitive.
Uh-huh.
But if we look at why this matters, we have to look at the anatomy of the forearm.
Okay, let's break that down.
Your forearm is packed with flexor muscles, and those muscles cross over the wrist joint and attach to your fingers. When you squeeze a dumbbell handle as hard as you can, you are fully contracting those forearm flexors.
Okay, I follow that. Squeezing activates the forearm?
Now, when the forearm is fully activated and the wrist is locked tight, your body naturally wants to use that rigid structure as a lever. It invites your wrist to help snap the weight upward at the top of the movement.
Ah, so it recruits the forearm to take the tension away from the bicep.
Exactly. By cupping the weight, letting it rest heavily on the palm, and pointing the index finger out, you are effectively disabling those flexor muscles. You are taking the wrist completely out of the equation.
You're turning off the auxiliary power.
That is a great way to put it. Because the wrist can no longer help leverage the weight up, the elbow joint becomes the sole hinge.
Wow.
And the muscle responsible for flexing that elbow, the brachialis and the outer head of the bicep, suddenly has to bear 100% of the load.
So that's how he perfectly isolates the outer portion of the bicep while preventing ego lifting. You literally can't ego lift if your grip is compromised like that.
Right. Keep those elbows tucked in, and you physically cannot cheat. Keith actually demonstrates how just assuming this cupped grip automatically forces the bicep to preflex.
Before you even move the weight.
Yeah. Before you even start the curl, the target muscle is already under tension just trying to stabilize the dumbbell in that awkward position. It makes lighter weights feel much, much heavier.
Okay, so now that we know how to hold the weight and how to isolate the muscle, how do we actually build a routine out of this? We need to move from technique to practical programming.
Right. How do you put this into practice on the gym floor?
Yeah, like what are the variations? Because you can change the angle, right? Going straight up and down targets the outer bicep, but Keith also talks about altering the angle.
He does. He will often alternate by bringing the dumbbell inside, so pulling it across the body, toward the opposite pec.
And what does that change?
When you drag the weight across the body like that, you engage slightly different stabilizer muscles in the forearm alongside the brachialis. It really contributes to overall thickness.
Oh, nice. And he mentions you can use a cable rope too, right?
Yes, applying this same cupped grip philosophy to a cable machine. You pull up with the rope and supinate, twisting the wrists up and outward at the top.
Right, to get that extra squeeze. But wait, what about the incline bench curl? A lot of gym bros absolutely love doing those to get a really deep stretch on the bicep. Why does Keith actively avoid that?
He specifically addresses the incline bench. And you're right, he avoids it entirely. He acknowledges that people like it because that stretch feels like you're doing a lot of work.
Yeah, it burns.
But Keith looks at this through the lens of risk versus reward. When you lean back on that incline bench and let the heavy dumbbells hang down, you are placing an enormous amount of loaded stretching pressure on the shoulder capsule.
Oh, specifically the anterior deltoid, right.
Exactly. The arm is being pulled backward, and the weight is essentially trying to rip the shoulder out of the socket. It's just unnecessary torque.
So he prefers standing up.
Standing keeps the load securely over your center of gravity. It protects the shoulder joint, and it still allows for perfect bicep isolation if you maintain that cupped grip.
Makes sense. Now let's talk volume, because the volume protocol he lays out is intense.
It is grueling. He prescribes a strict high-volume protocol. We are looking at 4 to 6 sets of 15 to 20 reps.
15 to 20 reps.
Per set.
That is agonizing. If you are not using momentum and you're disabling your forearms, the metabolic stress of 20 reps is going to be insane.
The lactic acid buildup is immense, and you should only use a weight that allows for this high repetition cleanly.
So no bumping up to the 30-pounders just to look cool.
Definitely not. Sometimes Keith even uses it as a light finisher with just 10 to 15 pounds to completely obliterate the muscle fibers.
So what does this all mean? Let's distill this deep dive for everyone listening. Building your arms isn't about how much iron you can move through the air.
Not at all.
It's about checking your ego. It's about creating a true mind-muscle connection. You use a slotted drag curl to isolate the muscle and warm it up, and then you utilize a cupped grip on hammer curls to maximize efficiency without wrecking your joints.
It really is a masterclass in shifting from an ego-driven practice to a biologically driven one.
Absolutely.
And, it leaves us with a broader philosophical question, really inspired by this whole built different mentality.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If simply changing your grip and reducing the weight can drastically improve your physical results, just by forcing a true connection to the muscle, it raises an important question.
Good jizz.
What other areas of your life are you just swinging the 35-pound dumbbells on autopilot, relying on sheer momentum instead of actually connecting with the work you're doing?
Wow. Are you relying on momentum in your career, in your relationships? That is a phenomenal point to land on. Sometimes you just need to drop the weight and find that slotted track.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take these mechanics, test them out on your next arm day, and as always, stay insanely curious.